Ignition sequence starts. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Hey everybody, this is the Digital Asset Investor, and John Deaton did a interview with Thinking Crypto, and Link2 had clipped this part out. Watch this.
What I've been telling people is that somewhere between March 6th and May 6th, we'll get the ruling. It could be today or it could be May 6th. All we can do is say, if you look at her previous cases, this is the general timeline for the summary judgment decision. If May 1st comes and she hasn't decided, I'll be surprised.
Okay, as long as I'm talking about Link2, reminder, they've got Link2 private equity itself on the platform, and just so you know, the Link2 private equity is my largest holding on the platform, and you can click on the link in the top of the description and go up there and check it out. You have to be an accredited investor. Now, Jeremy Hogan was on the 3T Warrior Academy. I think I'm saying that right. He was on their show yesterday, and I found this gem of a clip. Listen to what Jeremy Hogan says.
Right, so your initial statement is correct. A settlement, there's no appeal of a settlement, of course. The problem with the settlement is it has no effect on any other cases in the space, right? So if Ripple settles with the SEC, it has absolutely no effect on the SEC's next lawsuit against another crypto company. So in a sense, it's good for Ripple, but a settlement between the SEC and Ripple is bad for crypto.
Correct.
Because in the past, remember, every lawsuit that the SEC has brought in the past against these companies, no one has really been able to put up a fight. I mean, Library put up a fight, but they only had like $1 million to fight the SEC, which in the legal world is not a lot of money. Ripple's put $100 million into fighting the SEC. And the facts for Ripple are pretty good, better than for most crypto projects. So this is the case where the SEC could be what they're doing could be put to an end with the Ripple case, because that will then be the end of the SEC being able to make some of these arguments they've been making in the past. So if Ripple settles, all of that money for the crypto space is wasted. Now, they would have to do what's in the best interest of the company, but at the same time, it's not going to have any effect as far as the other, as far as crypto in general. If the judge rules in Ripple's favor, I do not think the SEC is going to appeal. And the reason I say that is because there's no benefit to the SEC to appeal, because if the case then goes up to the Second Circuit in the appellate court and the Second Circuit rules against the SEC, now that becomes binding precedent. And the SEC is screwed as far as any other lawsuits that they want to bring. So if I'm the SEC, and I'm 90% sure this is what they would do, and they lose, there won't be an appeal, because they don't want to mess up their whole agenda here in enforcing these regulations against the crypto space. So in my mind, the only way we get the Ripple test is if Ripple loses at the trial court level, appeals it up to the Second Circuit, because then Ripple will do it because they have the money and they have the incentive to do it. And they're going to want the Second Circuit to say, no, we're going to replace the Howey test with the Ripple test, and we're going to require an investment contract to actually have a contract. So that's how that would all work. Now, time-wise, we get the judge's decision, let's say in April or May. The Second Circuit wouldn't be hearing it till next year. And if it goes up to the U.S. Supreme Court from there to really replace the Howey test, we're talking 2 to 3 more years from there.
Ooh, that'd be a long haul. Now, let's check in. There was an interview done with Navin Gupta, who is one of the rock stars from Ripple. Watch this.
So let me just carry on with that thought, right? So I'm just going to recap what I've just heard, right? So a lot of money came very quickly into blockchain. With all that money came all that expectation. All that expectation led to a number of projects which people wanted to justify to, I guess, validate the fact that the sector needed the kind of money which was invested. Some of those projects, or 95% of those projects, are possibly not solving any real problems. So therefore, they they're not of value, and therefore that's leading to slower adoption. Payments and gaming is two areas where you see early adoption. If I come back to payments for a second, what needs to happen to see greater adoption of blockchain, right, in the payment sector?
The single biggest thing that needs to happen is recognition from the regulators to essentially say, hey, here are the rules of the road, the AML, KYC, the norms that you essentially need to take care of. But after that, this particular use case can essentially take off in a country. So the only thing we need is regulatory clarity that essentially digital assets or cryptos can essentially be used to move value cross-border from point A to point B. And that's it. After that, there is nothing else that's required. Companies like us and many other companies will essentially just take this use case like a rocket ship.
Like a rocket ship. Regulatory clarity equals rocket ship. Now look at this from Judy Shelton. I said here, forget climate change and all that stuff. This is what's unsustainable. She says, look at the Fed's latest H41 statement. They are paying 4.9% on $3.4 trillion on bank reserves. They're paying 4.8% on $2.6 trillion in money market mutual funds parked overnight through reverse purchase agreements. Just think the Fed is shelling out an annualized $291 billion on $6 trillion in cash to keep it from going into the real economy. It's more than Fed earns on its own portfolio, so Treasury is advancing funds. How much of that interest being paid by the Fed is going to foreign-owned financial institutions? Folks, we've been covering this joke for years on this channel, and unfortunately, we're being proven to be 1,000% right. Look at this. I can't tell you how many times we've said this. Now, this is a flashback right here to Kendra Hill, who disappeared off of social media. She said she said people assume that Bitcoin can't be banned, but she said they will not let a currency that threatens the financial system live, and literally said that they would, acted like they would destroy Bitcoin if they needed to. Robert Kennedy had put this tweet out, and here's the quote. The Fed will initially limit its CBDC to interbank transactions, but we should not be blind to the obvious danger that is the first step in banning and seizing Bitcoin, as the Treasury did with gold 90 years ago today in 1933. Then he had this tweet about the collapse of U.S. influence over Saudi Arabia and the kingdom. Of new alliances with China and Iran are painful emblems of the abject failure of the neocon strategy of maintaining U.S. global hegemony with aggressive projections of military power. I'm not going to read that whole thing, but I agree. Now, this is one of those situations where I don't want to say I told you so. I wish I was wrong. But we now have the value, even Donald Trump said it in his speech the other day. It's hitting mainstream now that the U.S. dollar is in the process of being dethroned. And anybody listening to my voice, if you don't know how bad that will be for you and your families in America, strap in. I've tried to inform the public about this for years now, about what was going to come. Watch this.
Smart foreigners, and there are some, believe it or not, started to dump the U.S. dollar. Why? Because the U.S. dollar was no longer a reliable store of value. Suddenly, it was a political weapon that could be wielded at will against anyone who held it. So what if you had a border dispute with one of your neighbors that the State Department hadn't authorized? Or what if you accidentally criticized transgender theology and irritated the Human Rights Campaign? Well, the U.S. government might denounce you as immoral and then confiscate all your money. Because they just did that with Russia. And as a result, dollars began to look much less appealing to the rest of the world. And so de-dollarization began. And it has accelerated at remarkable speed, almost without comment in the American media, over the last year. So Russia announced it will conduct business in Asia, Africa, and Latin America in Chinese currency. Brazil, which has a brand new government supported by the Biden administration, announced it will do the same thing. Brazil, largest economy in the hemisphere after ours. Pakistan is doing the same thing. That's a longtime U.S. ally. India and Malaysia, two of the biggest economies in the world, announced they'll be settling their trade in their own currencies, not the dollar. Even France, which we liberated, is using Chinese currency in a new liquefied natural gas trade. China and Saudi Arabia are now major business partners. And again, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is happening.
Just this week, it's very obvious that there's a coordinated cross-country, multiple countries involved. The news that's been popping up, it's very obviously a coordinated effort to dethrone the U.S. dollar, and it includes several different countries. Now, here's Jesse Waters on Fox News talking about the same thing.
For the first time ever, our rivals on the international stage are moving off the dollar as the benchmark currency. China and Russia are teaming up. They're now trading to Chinese yuan. Brazil, France, Iran, India, and the Saudis are all moving away from the dollar, leaving us in the dust. This isn't good. This devalues the dollar and sends every price up. Gas, electric, oil, prescription drugs, food prices. Heritage Foundation economist and Substack columnist Peter St. Ange joins me now.
Hey,
Peter,
that's the guy I've been
explain
covering.
this to me like I'm 11 years old. Why should I be worried?
Yeah, well, that was a great summary, Jesse. And, really one of the driving goals of our foreign policy for decades now has been protecting the U.S. dollar. And at this point, this administration is throwing that away. And the reason that matters for regular people, not only does that erode our influence in the world, it's bad for our economy. It takes away some of the advantages that we have. But this is something where if the abandonment of the dollar takes off, for 80 years now, we have flooded the world with U.S. dollars. They've kept hold of them. That's been fantastic because they give them useful things. They give us toasters and cars and copper mines for those dollars. Now, the problem is if we throw that away, all of those dollars come flooding back into America. That means we have way too many dollars. We have a word for that, which is inflation. So we could see enormous inflation, and that's at a time when our banks are already wobbling.
So what can Joe Biden do about this right now? Because it seems like the entire world is conspiring against us and the dollar.
Yeah,
What can he do? He can barely tie his shoes. What do you mean, what can he do?
things. One of them we have been trying to get him to do for a long time, which is cut the spending. The inflation right now for the past, year and a half, Americans have been suffering, highest inflation in 50 years because of all the government spending. Forget raising, interest rates, forget all these shenanigans with the banks, cut the spending. Number two is we need to learn to mind our own business. Other countries have their way of doing things. If we go in there and we start dictating social...
Listen, folks, this is being done intentionally. I've watched politics and all. This channel, we don't get real political, but I've watched politics my whole life. And there are 1,000 things that make zero common sense that are going on in this country now from a political standpoint. And the only road it leads to is that it's all being done intentionally. I believe there are people behind this country right now who are intentionally collapsing our economy because they don't believe in the sovereignty of our country. They believe in having some kind of global order or whatever. That's what I think is really happening. But I'm doing several things, and then let me finish covering this. U.S. ally Japan sells U.S. government bonds in mass. This guy says, imagine not owning gold right now. I'm on the same page, and he says, can you guess what's going to happen soon? And then you've got this: 3 U.S. congressmen introduced gold standard bill to stabilize the U.S. dollar's value. Folks, look, there's not going to be a lot of places to run in this, and I'm not a financial advisor, but I can tell you what I'm doing. One, I tell you all the time, I've got my sponsor, Glint. I have a Glint account. I have gold in my Glint account. I've got that spendable debit MasterCard that I use with it. I have physical gold. I make sure that I've got plenty of cash. I make sure that I have plenty of physical cash. And Other than that, I try to make sure I don't have too much debt. Those are the things that any thinking person, I can't tell you what to do because I'm not a financial advisor, but that's my experience is that's the smart thing in times like this. That doesn't mean that the value of just about every asset will not decline. But the one that I failed to mention is that I make sure I have my XRP on my ledger so that it's mine. Those are the things I'm doing. I'm the digital asset investor. I'm not an investment advisor. This is for entertainment purposes only. Please subscribe, hit the like button, tell your friends and family that the link to Glint will be in the top of the description. Right